Wonderful. Well, I do want to start with an acknowledgement of country. I'm joining you from the Wurundjeri land, so I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, but it's not lost on me that we're joining from everywhere across the globe, so I pay my respect to elders past, present and future as the traditional custodians of all of the lands in which we all join here today. What I wanted to do was actually just start with a question. So I'm aware that there's a lot of people that I'm talking to, and it's probably preaching to the converted on this call. But I wanted to start with asking you, when was the last time you felt you were performing at your best? That is, not just delivering results, not just ticking boxes, but when you felt fully alive, fully engaged, and really proud of what it was that you were creating. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to think about that. And I want you to think about, in that moment, it might actually be now. You might be living it right now. It doesn't always just have to be work. But what made that possible? So what were the conditions that you were in that allowed that version of yourself to show up? You need to think about that thought. Chances are it wasn't just the work itself, because we know that high performance and well-being does not happen in isolation, right? It's very likely the environment that you were in. I gave a bit of a teaser to that one, but it might have been the leaders that inspired you at the time, who provided you with that opportunity to grow, the ones that backed you, that believed you, that gave you that recognition publicly in the room, or those that really positively role modeled healthy habits and behaviors. That is, what they said to do, they did themselves. Could have been the freedom to try new things without getting it wrong. So that's what I really want to explore with you today. There's no doubt that wellbeing programs have a role, but I really want to talk about wellbeing and psychological safety as levers for sustained success for the teams in which we lead and for the organisations in which we lead them in. We know that performance is not just about output. Sustainable performance, the kind that goes beyond a quarter, goes beyond that deliverable. It even goes beyond a leader. It comes from the conditions we create for people to succeed. Us as leaders. So I'm talking to you as a leader, and I'm a leader myself. It's also not lost on me that we are humans ourselves, and we don't always get it right, including myself. So hopefully there's some tips that I can share across the next 30 minutes where we can talk through some of the levers that we can draw on. And there are two that I really want to focus through, and that's leading with wellbeing and psychological safety. And these are two levers that every leader on this call has access to. Anyone can push for short-term performance, right? But leaders who walk the talk on wellbeing and really provide trust and psychological safety are the ones that sustain it in the room and for the long term. Now, why does all this matter? I'm sure you've seen the statistics before, but grounding ourselves in the why, we know the data. 60 billion in Australia, mental ill health costs us $60 billion a year. That's outstanding. Burnout's officially recognised by the World Health Organization as an occupational phenomenon. But importantly, Gallup shows us that when well-being and psychological safety, those two levers that I just spoke about, when they're high, importantly, performance improves by 27%. Staff turnover drops by about 40%. And people are twice as likely to say that they're pretty proud of the place in which they work. So I think it's important that the data does matter. Beyond the numbers do matter. They build the business case for sure. But if we stop there, we miss the full picture. And here's the full picture. Because behind every percentage point of performance, there's a person. Someone doing meaningful work, navigating complexity, doing life, People who want to come to work and give their best. I'm a firm believer that nobody wakes up wanting to do a bad job. As leaders, we have a role to ensure that they have enough energy left over for the people they love when they go home. So what does all this mean? Wellbeing as performance levers. Well, here's the truth. The conversation, as I mentioned, isn't about wellbeing programs or posters. I strongly believe it's about how work feels, whether it gives us energy or it drains it. So when I spoke before around thinking about a time when you were performing at your best, I know when I think about that, I genuinely think about it's usually the leader that I was around and the type of work that I did. Wellbeing performance isn't about the way we work. It's about how we design work for success. And as leaders, we have a role to play in that. We know that wellbeing and productivity are interdependent performance levers. I'm not going to give you the data around when wellbeing deteriorates, what that means in terms of innovation decline. We know all of that. But poorly structured work and roles or tasks, they reduce productivity, wellbeing declines. We're not bouncing out of bed that day to really hit goals or feel like we're making an impact. We probably feel a little bit less motivated and resilient. But when we design work for energy and recovery, then wellbeing isn't just something that individuals have to manage when they go home. It's designed in the work in which we provide them. So these three levers on the screen here, hopefully you can see it and the technology is still on my side. Visibility and equal distribution of workload. What does that mean? Burnout is often hidden in plain sight. That is, it hides with the quiet achievers. I like to call them the relentless performers. Probably a lot on this call. Those A-type personalities, those superstars in your team, you might even be one of them, you consistently delegate the work to because they'll deliver it to a high standard and they'll never say no. They're the ones that never complain, but sometimes can carry too much. So as leaders, we need to bring transparency to workloads and make sure the effort's shared. It also gives an opportunity for the team, so there is a bit of equity around that. The second lever is around designing for energy and not time. I spoke a little bit about that. We often talk about time management as the key to performance. I'm not suggesting that managing your time won't set you up for success, but the brain doesn't run on time, it runs on energy, right? The prefrontal cortex, that's like that part of the brain that drives focus, decision-making, and emotional regulation. It burns through energy pretty fast. In fact, I think it makes up about 2% of our body, but it uses 20% of our energy. So peak performance comes from aligning high-value work with high energy. So what does that mean as leaders? It's not to get more hours out of our people. We know that. I think I've been pretty clear around that. But it's to really create the conditions that protect and renew cognitive energy. Good work is good for people, ensuring that we design work in a way or give opportunities to people that plays to their strength. That's when we'll get the best out of the people in which we can lead. And the third lever is systemic recovery. So recovery isn't a perk, and we need to talk openly about that. It's a performance system. When you think about the best performers, the brain and body need structured recovery to sustain focus, creativity, and decision quality. We must build recovery into the design of how we work. So there's one component around the work that we do, and there's another in the way that we work. Rethinking pace, even thinking about workload distribution, meeting cadence, running from one meeting to the next. Do we really feel at our best for the whole day when every single day feels quite the same? So thinking about that, and it shouldn't be left up to the individual to only think about how they set their day up. When these things are done right, these three things on the screen, visibility and equal distribution of workload, remembering those relentless high performers, and giving equal opportunity of workload to your whole team, designing for energy and not just time. Good work is good for people, and also systemic recovery, they all become our performance levers. This is probably my most favorite area though. And the second truth is the most powerful tool we have as leaders isn't policy. It's not the 3 levers that I spoke about earlier, although they're critical. It's our own behavior. And as cheesy as this might sound, culture is caught, not taught. Our people won't really copy what we say about well-being. If we tell people we value well-being, but we're not actually positively role modeling it ourselves, it doesn't give the people a sense of agency to do the same. So when we role model, it really sets that signal and gives others permission to do the same. Makes sense? Not always easy to do in practice. We need to set boundaries and be really clear around that. Taking time to recharge really signals to our people that recovery is actually important. It's not a weakness. The other thing I wanted to talk about was authenticity, and that drives influence. So teams mirror the emotional tone of leaders. Calm leadership reflects stress, the regulation of it across what can sometimes be a fractured system. You know, when the stakes are high, as leaders, we have a role to play to calm the ship. It's not to say to walk around like robots. We can still show up authentically and say we don't have all the answers. But we shouldn't have frantic leadership because then it amplifies stress. So we have a role to play in terms of calm leadership, particularly when the stakes are high. I think what's really important is just taking the small actions in the day-to-day, logging off at a reasonable time, or even if you have to work that little bit extra, making sure that you've got the time stamps on your emails so you're not sending emails late at night and then having a wellbeing check-in with your team the next morning. Being really vocal about how you protect strategic, deep work. I know myself, I say to my team, I generally try not to have meetings on Fridays. Why? Because I feel like that's when I do my best work, my deep work. And I've started to notice that they're starting to protect that time in their diaries too. We might all do these things, but I think the key is being really vocal about how we lead. The positive habits that we adopt in our day will give people that sense of permission to do the same. Taking annual leave, properly taking annual leave. Not checking in while you're on annual leave. They're really important signals to our team to demonstrate that we take this seriously, that what we say we value, we actually do for ourselves. And also, it gives us that oxygen mask so we feel better to show up for the teams in which we lead. Now let's talk about psychological safety. And we're not going to talk in great detail about this. Amy Edmondson does this greatly, and she defines it as a belief that you can speak up with ideas, questions or concerns without fear of reprimand. So if well-being is about capacity to be at your best, think about psychological safety as a sense of permission to be at your best. Well-being, leading with well-being, to be at your best, and provide psychological safety for people to be at their best. So why does this matter? It's interesting because I was reading some statistics and the other week on the cost of poor psych safety, and we know that silence is costly. You may have heard the statistics already, but in hospitals, studies show that teams who report more errors actually have better patient outcomes. Not because they make more mistakes, but because they feel safe enough to report them. They learn from them, they improve, they move on. In business, teams with psychological safety, they stay silent. We've probably been in teams ourselves where we've maybe had that question, but we just didn't ask it, or we didn't put that challenge in the room. Don't share that risky idea. Don't flag the emerging problem. I'm sure we've all been there, even as people in teams ourselves. So what can we do to build psychological safety? Lead with wellbeing and building psychological safety. There's just some simple things that you can do in your day, and you may already be doing it. Just being a bit more mindful. Respond to bad news with curiosity, not blame. That's not to say that you don't go, oh gosh, but just a mindful pause and then respond with curiosity. Because there will be errors, and how we respond to those errors and navigate through them effectively with the teams in which we lead will provide psychological safety. You know, sometimes we talk about, we're not here to save lives. Some people on this call might be, but I think what's really important is if there is bad news, or if there is something that somebody comes to you with that they've not quite got right, take that moment and respond with curiosity. We've got this. That will give psych safety and trust. Publicly thank people for raising risks. So that brave person, if you have created psych safety and they've raised something in the room, you know, thanks for raising that. Let's explore that. I hadn't thought of that. Really important to encourage challenge. That creates psychological safety. The other one is modeling fallibility ourselves. So as I mentioned earlier, as leaders, we don't have to have all the answers. So if somebody asks a question, ask the question back. Actually, I'm not sure, I hadn't thought about that. What do you think? Let's go away and explore that together. Creates innovation. It also gives that sense of people's ideas generating in the room, whether it's virtual or in person. I know all of this stuff doesn't sound complicated, but it may feel uneasy sometimes for people, because I feel like often leaders feel like they have to have it all together when we don't. And sometimes it's these simple, tiny changes that we can make or just be a little bit more aware of in the day-to-day. So bringing it all together, it's obvious that wellbeing and psychological safety are not separate, right? Wellbeing creates the capacity to perform at your best, and psychological safety creates permission to perform. Together, they unlock sustainable, high performance, wellbeing, and the output is clear. You know it already: innovation, excellence, and a shared sense of success. So what do we need to do? We need to design for sustainable performance, moving from activity to outcomes. Stop measuring input like hours, focus on outputs and value delivered, and publicly praising for that. From compliance to trust. So create systems that empower people to make smart decisions rather than micromanage. The other thing that we need to do is move the focus from individual recovery to systemic recovery. So some of those habits and weaving them into the day-to-day, build recovery into the flow of work, highlighting that it will make us better performers if we have white space in the diary. Rethink meeting cadence. Decline meetings so that you're not the one that's the relentless person to your diary, and tell your team to do the same. Making sure that you're showing up in the same way in which you're asking your teams to do that. So I want you to have a think about that. And I want you to have a think through some of the stuff that I've shared. If you've got a pen or just a silent pause, what's one barrier in your team that you feel might be draining energy or silencing voices? I'm going to give you 60 seconds to write that down. And while you're thinking through that, it could be the back-to-back meeting example that I shared. You know, that consistent urgency, people moving from task to task without reset. Is that draining energy? No space for reflection, only reactivity. Is perfectionism being disguised as high standards? When people fear mistakes, they hide early thinking. Avoid risk and innovation stalls. It might be that. You know, I'm just a perfectionist. Actually, are you? Do we need to be perfect? Sometimes perfectionism delays excellence. Energy shifts from creating to protecting when we operate that way. It might even be unclear priorities or being unclear with our teams when the goalpost shifts, and sometimes they do. That's when cognitive overload kicks in. People spend their energy kind of guessing through what matters most instead of doing what matters most. So if you've got that one barrier in your team that might drain energy or silence your voice in the teams, if you take nothing more from what I've asked or shared today, I want you to think about one leadership action you could take to shift that barrier that you identified. This is where commitment begins. What is one thing that you can do differently in the way in which you lead that's draining the energy from the teams in which you lead, or even draining your own energy? It might be publicly protecting that thinking time. That could be your one action. It might be re-anchoring your team weekly, clearly naming the top 3 priorities that are of core focus. So everybody's really clear. That's when the cognitive energy can kick in. Maybe ask before telling. I know this is one that I try to do quite a lot. We don't have all the answers, or even when we do, how powerful sometimes it is to stop and pause and not say, here's what we need to do, but maybe say, what do you think is the best next step? Maybe that's your one action that you can think through, because empowerment also restores energy. So as leaders, we're designers of systems, and that's a real catalyst for human success. When we lead with well-being, when we look after ourselves, when we prioritize our own well-being and positively role model behaviors and healthy habits, give our teams the agency to do the same. When we build trust and create that psychological safety, allow people to bring difference of opinion together, that's when we really sustain high performance. And the perfectionist is not lost on me in seeing that performance on this slide actually is missing an M. Thank you so much for your time. I hope there was something you got from that. Our legacy won't just be the targets we hit. I'm a firm believer in that. And if you think about a time when you were at your best, it was probably the conditions you were in and the leader that created those. Thank you.
Thank you, Lainie. What an absolute masterclass. I was taking notes there, and I feel better for just having listened. We've got a couple of minutes just now for questions. I know we've got people joining from YouTube, from StreamYard, from I think LinkedIn Live on our website as well. If you've got a comment feature on any of those platforms, pop in a question. I've got a couple of questions though that I would love to fling your way, Lainie, if that's cool.
I love them. I love it. I love a good chat with yourself, Ryan. There's none that we've got in the chat here.
Good news. Well, you work with a lot of organizations. I know you've seen a lot. You've seen the good, you've seen the bad. When it comes to well-being approaches or programs, what's the one thing that you wish organizations would stop doing?
Oh, that's a good question, because I thought you were going to ask me what's the one thing that they should do. But I think I think the one thing that organizations or leaders within organizations need to stop doing is trying to do everything and really looking at the data and focusing on the hotspots in your organization. So, what might be good for one organization by way of a program, if we're talking around that, might not necessarily be the hotspot in the other organization. So look at your data and focus there. And if the program that you're looking at matches up with the problem that you're trying to solve for, then do that. But if it doesn't, then stop doing it.
Yeah, there's been so many kind of blanket approaches to well-being that don't look to solution anything or try to be everything to everyone, and as a byproduct don't often solve a problem. We've got a question come in from someone on YouTube. They've said, how do we know if a relentless high performer is taking on too much?
Oh gosh, we've got 3 minutes. I feel like I can take that.
All right, yeah. All right, we have to give a condensed answer for that one.
A really rapid fire on that. Look, to make it simple, it's the quality of the connection and the conversation you'll have with that person. So even if you feel that they're telling you that they're okay, sometimes there are small things that might be different in the way that they're showing up. If they're not, then as leaders, we owe it to ourselves to also sometimes make executive decisions. But I can tell you, you'll start to see it in maybe some of their outputs, in the way that they're, engaging or disengaging in certain things. They might not be as energetic as what they have always been. So there might be those little symbols. But even if there are not, I have to say, sometimes as leaders, particularly for that relentless performer, we owe it to ourselves and all of the team to say, you know what, focus on these 3 things and delegate accordingly across the rest of the team. Hope that quickly answers it.
I was very succinct. It could have went on for a long time on that one. Appreciate it. Great question though. We've got one more, probably time for one more. We get 2 minutes. This one's how have our attitudes and expectations changed over the last while? How do you think attitudes and expectations, I'm assuming around well-being, has changed over the last while?
Well, I mean, I could talk globally, I could talk in Australian context, or I could talk across various workplaces, but I'll talk about workplace wellbeing. I mean, I think the attitudes have certainly changed in all of the conversations that I've had, both internally and externally, around wellbeing, moving beyond just a program to one where we really need to embed it across the way we work. I think what's also changed is really understanding that leadership plays a core role in ensuring that we set our teams up for success. And what I mean by that is all of the things that I've just walked through. So whilst wellbeing programs are and can be awesome, what's critical is, I think, the difference that I've seen, leaders understanding the quality of human connection and what leaders' role is in that will be the number one contributor or prohibitor to wellbeing for the individual. So if you've got a good leader, you will generally feel that you're enjoying work, you're improved, your wellbeing will be improved. There's that statistic that I often quote, Ryan, which is, leaders or people leave an organization generally because of the leader, sometimes more money, but generally because of a leader or a poor leader. But the other compelling statistic is around a leader has more impact on a person that they lead than their therapist. So just sitting with that. And I think that, leaders' role in well-being has certainly changed.
Wow, excellent. All right, we'll leave it there and let that sit in. And I'll say thank you very much, Lainie, for being so generous with your time, with sharing your insights, a lot of personal and organizational tips that people can take away. I hope you had your notepads out. But yeah, thank you, Lainie, for being so generous with your time.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.